Today I want to tell you a story. And unlike most of the videos I have made on this channel, this one is not going to start with definitions or research. It is going to start the way the best stories usually do, with a person. When I was working in a call center, I had this office mate. I did not know her well, but I noticed her immediately. She was the kind of person who walked into a room and changed the energy of it without even trying. She always wore red lipstick. She greeted people warmly. She talked about traveling and learning languages. And there was something about the way she moved through life that struck me as genuinely unbothered, not in the fake performance kind of way, but in the way of someone who had made peace with something important about herself. She was a little older than me, and she was single, and she seemed completely fine with all of it. I watched her from a distance the way I tend to observe people I find interesting. And at some point, I noticed something on her social media profile. A few letters. INFJ. I had no idea what it meant. I did not look it up right away. Life moved on. I got sick, I left that job, and eventually I found myself with more time on my hands than I knew what to do with. And those 4 letters came back to me. So I looked them up. I took the test. And the result came back the same as hers. INFJ. And then I read the description. And I had the most complicated reaction to it. Because on one hand, it was like reading something that described me in a way that nothing had ever described me before. Like someone had looked directly into the part of myself I kept most private and found words for it. And on the other hand, it made me deeply uncomfortable. Because what it was confirming was something I had always suspected but never wanted to fully accept. That I was genuinely different in a way that was not going to go away. That the way I experienced the world, the way I absorbed emotions, the way I could see things in people that they had not said out loud, the way I could feel so completely alone in a room full of people, all of that was not just circumstance. It was wired into how I was built. And accepting that felt like adding one more layer of complicated to a life that was already extremely complicated. Let me explain what INFJ actually means, for anyone who is not familiar with it, because I want this video to be useful even if you are hearing this for the first time. MBTI stands for the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. It is a personality framework based on the psychological theories of Carl Jung, a Swiss psychiatrist who studied how people think, feel, and make sense of the world. The framework sorts people into 16 types based on 4 pairs of preferences. Whether you are more introverted or extroverted. Whether you rely more on concrete facts or on intuition and patterns. Whether you make decisions more through logic or through feeling and values. And whether you prefer structure and planning or flexibility and spontaneity. INFJ stands for introverted, intuitive, feeling, and judging. People with this type are often described as deeply empathetic, highly perceptive, quietly intense, and idealistic in a way that can sometimes make ordinary life feel disappointing. They feel things very deeply. They pick up on things other people miss. They want connection that is genuine and meaningful, not surface level. And they tend to be rare, estimated at somewhere around 1 to 3% of the population depending on the source you use. When I read that description for the first time and realized it was describing me, I did not feel proud. I felt tired. Because being rare is not always a gift. Sometimes it just means you have spent your whole life in rooms where nobody quite understood you, and now you have a name for why. But I kept reading. And the more I read, the harder it was to deny. Here is the thing about discovering your personality type as an adult, especially if you have spent years trying to figure out why you function the way you do. It does not fix anything, but it gives you a language. And having language for your own experience is not a small thing. It is actually one of the more quietly powerful things that can happen to a person who has spent a long time feeling like they were just difficult or broken or too much or not enough. I want to share something else from this journey because I think it adds something meaningful to the conversation. Sometime after I learned my own type, I was talking to a student, a young girl from Korea, who was still in junior high school. She kept booking my classes and she was unusually talkative and emotionally expressive for someone her age. But she told me she had trouble making friends at school. I found that puzzling at first because in class she was so open and articulate. She could hold a real conversation. Why would someone like that struggle socially? I started wondering if something difficult was happening for her. So I opened up a little about my own experience. about moving frequently when I was younger, attending multiple schools across different years, never quite settling into one community long enough to feel truly part of it, about managing academically despite everything, earning leadership roles even in environments that were far from ideal, about the gap between how capable you can appear on the outside and how much you are quietly carrying on the inside. She listened, and then she told me she was not being bullied. She said it was just genuinely hard, that she could connect with teachers. She could connect with me, but with people her own age, something always fell off. We talked about MBTI eventually. Asked her type before sharing mine. And when she said INFJ, I genuinely paused, because the chances of that felt almost too neat. And then she told me her mother was also INFJ, and that she knew others in her life who were the same type. That conversation stayed with me, and it made me start thinking about something that does not get discussed very often in the personality type community: whether certain types might be more likely to appear across generations in a family. Not in a deterministic, you are born this way forever kind of sense, but in the sense that the environments we grow up in, the ways our parents and grandparents survived difficult things, the patterns they developed and passed on, all of that shapes how we process the world. And if someone who experienced a lot of adversity developed the kind of deep observational skills and emotional sensitivity that INFJ describes, they might raise children in ways that bring out those same traits. Or the child might develop them as their own response to difficulty. Looking at my own family, this resonates in a quiet and complicated way. There were people across different generations who had sharp instincts about people, who were gifted at conversation and reading situations, who also spent a great deal of time inside their own heads, who struggled to form large social circles but could be remarkably perceptive when they did connect with someone, who carried the weight of difficult lives while often appearing more capable than they actually were. I am not claiming that personality type is hereditary in the way eye color is. The science does not support something that neat. But the combination of genetics and environment, of how trauma shapes perception, of how certain survival strategies get passed down through families without anyone naming them, that is worth thinking about. Because sometimes understanding where you come from helps you understand why you are the way you are. And that understanding is not meant to excuse anything. It is meant to help you be a little gentler with yourself. I also want to talk about daydreaming because I think it connects directly to the INFJ experience and to the broader question of how people with this type have historically managed the gap between their rich inner world and the often disappointing outer one. From a very young age, I spent a lot of time inside my own head. When I was supposed to be sleeping, I was daydreaming instead. When I walked somewhere, I was having elaborate internal conversations. When life felt too heavy to sit with directly, I would create an alternative version of it in my mind and live there for a while. My father, who had his own complicated relationship with the world, once told me that talking to yourself was not crazy, that it was actually a sign of a thinking mind. He said it in his own imperfect way, but I held on to that, because it was one of the few times someone gave me permission to be exactly how I was without telling me it needed to be fixed. That kind of inner life is very common among INFJs, particularly those who grew up in environments where external reality was not particularly safe or comfortable. The inner world becomes the place where you have control, where things can go the way you need them to, where you can process without exposure. It is a survival tool that can become a permanent feature of how you operate. And like most things that begin as survival tools, it has both gifts and costs. The gift is a vivid imagination, a capacity for empathy that is almost visceral, and a deep understanding of human motivation that most people have to work much harder to develop. The cost is that it can make the real world feel flat by comparison, and it can become a form of avoidance when used too heavily. The skill is in learning to choose, in using the inner world for processing and creating rather than hiding, and in being willing to come back out when you are ready. For me, accepting that I am INFJ took time. Not because the description was wrong, but because accepting it meant accepting that certain things about my life were always going to require more effort than they did for other people. That I was always going to need more recovery time after social interaction. That I was always going to feel things more intensely than was convenient. That I was always going to see things in people that they had not said yet, and that this was both a gift and an enormous responsibility. But here is what I have come to believe, slowly, and with a lot of resistance. Knowing what you are is not a limitation. It is information. And information, used well, gives you choices you did not have before. When I look at the office mate who first made me curious about this, what I see now that I could not see then is someone who had done the work, who had looked at her own nature honestly, accepted the complicated parts along with the strengths, and found a way to move through the world that fit who she actually was. The red lipstick and the warm greetings were not performance. They were someone who had stopped fighting themselves. That is what I am working toward. Slowly, imperfectly, and with 2 dogs keeping me company. So before I close, I genuinely want to hear from you. How did you find out about your personality type? Was it something you stumbled across, something someone pointed out to you, or something you actively went looking for? And when you read the description for the first time, what was your reaction? Was it relief? Denial? Something in between? Drop it in the comments, because I think that moment of recognition means something different for everyone, and I would love to hear your version of it. Thanks for watching. If this video resonated with you, please consider hitting the subscribe button. I am currently working toward my goal of 1,000 subscribers, so I can finally monetize this channel and turn this passion into a sustainable part of my future. This is my unfiltered diary of solo living in the Philippines, and your support helps me keep this channel growing. If you would like to help out even more, you can check out the Buy a Treat for My Pets link in the description. My dogs definitely appreciate the love. Make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss the next update. Thank you for being such an important part of this journey. I will see you in the next one.